There is a voice reading these words to you right now. You can hear it. Not out loud, inside, just behind your eyes. It has a tone, a pace. It sounds, you'd swear, like you. You call it you, the narrator, the one in charge, the thing you mean when you say I. But here's the part that should stop you. For most of human history, people may have heard that exact same voice and been certain it belonged to someone else, a god, a dead father, a king who wasn't in the room. And by the time we finish, you'll see that the voice you trust most, or the one you think is you, had a beginning. In history, and in your own childhood, it can change its speaker. It can go silent. And what's left when it does is the real question. Start with where it came from, because it did come from somewhere. In 1934, a Russian psychologist named Lev Vygotsky was watching small children, and he noticed something everyone had walked past. Toddlers talk to themselves out loud. No, the red one goes here. Where's the other piece? There. A running commentary broadcast to the room. Then, around age 7, it disappears. Not because it stops, because it goes underground. The out-loud narration gets quieter and quieter, and then drops below the surface entirely and becomes the silent voice in your head. Read that again. The voice you call your innermost self started as you talking out loud to no one in a room. And before that, it started as other people talking to you. Your inner voice is a conversation you internalized. You learned to talk to yourself by first being talked to. The narrator was assembled out of every voice that ever told you to be careful, to try again, to sit still. You weren't born with it. You were taught it. So here is what's actually happening under the hood when you think in words. Your brain produces speech, the same machinery it would use to talk out loud, but it intercepts the signal before it reaches your mouth. A command to speak, sent and then swallowed. And some part of you listens to it as if it arrived from outside. You are, very quietly, both the speaker and the audience, talking and overhearing yourself talk in the same breath that never becomes a breath, which raises a strange possibility. If the voice is a signal your brain sends and then hears, what happens if the hearing part doesn't know the sending part is you? In 1976, a Princeton psychologist named Julian Jaynes published a book with one of the most audacious claims in the history of the field. He argued that as recently as 3,000 years ago, humans were not conscious the way you are. They had no inner I narrating their lives, no private mental space to deliberate in. Instead, when a decision had to be made, when stress spiked and a person didn't know what to do, the speech command part of the brain fired, and the rest of the brain heard it as a voice, an external one with authority, and they obeyed it because they had no concept that it was them. He called it the bicameral mind, 2 chambers, one that commands, one that listens, no bridge between them labeled self. His evidence was hiding in the oldest book the West has. Read the Iliad closely, Jaynes said, and you'll notice the characters almost never stop to think. They don't weigh options inwardly. They don't have a private monologue. At every crucial moment, a god appears and tells them what to do. And they do it. Achilles doesn't decide. Athena moves him. The gods, Jaynes argued, were not a literary device. They were how a bicameral brain experienced its own commands. The voice was real. They just heard it coming from the sky instead of from themselves. But here's the part that's even stranger. If he's right, then the gods didn't leave because people stopped believing in them. The gods went quiet because the voice changed owners. Somewhere in the last few thousand years, under the pressure of writing, of cities, of strangers you had to model and predict. Humans learned a new trick. They learned to recognize the voice as theirs, to pull the command back inside and call it a thought, to build the private inner room and put an eye in it to listen. Consciousness in this telling isn't ancient biology. It's a recent invention, a piece of mental software learned and passed down, the way reading is learned, the way no one is born able to do it. The voice didn't appear when the gods left. The voice was always there. What appeared was you, the listener who finally took credit for it. So that settles it, right? The voice is just you and always quietly was. Mystery closed. Well, not quite. Because when modern scientists actually went looking for the voice, they found something no one expected. Starting in the 1970s, a psychologist named Russell Hurlburt gave people a beeper and sent them into their normal lives. At random moments it chirped, and they froze and reported exactly what was in their experience the instant before. No editing, no theory. Everyone assumes the inner monologue runs constantly, a non-stop narration from wake to sleep. It doesn't. In the samples, inner speech showed up only a fraction of the time, often a quarter of the moments, sometimes far less. The rest of the time the mind was full of images, raw feeling, wordless awareness, no narrator at all. And in 2024, two researchers, Johanne Nedergård and Gary Lupyan, put a name to the far end of it, anendophasia, the condition of having little or no inner voice whatsoever. There are people walking around living full and competent lives who do not experience the voice you are listening to right now. They are not broken. They simply never assumed the narrator was always speaking, because for them it mostly isn't. The voice you treat as the bedrock of being you turns out to be intermittent. Sometimes loud, often gone, and in some minds nearly silent for a lifetime. So look at what that does to the old fear. You've heard the voices of the mad described as the ultimate horror. The schizophrenic who hears commands no one else can hear, the voice that says, do it. Jaynes thought that wasn't a new disease at all. He thought it was the old machine, the bicameral voice breaking back through in a mind that no longer has a word for it, but illness. The same signal, a different age, a different name, which means the voice in your head was never the enemy and never the self. It's a tool, an old, powerful, occasionally misfiring tool for talking yourself through the dark when there's no one else in the room. And once you see it as a tool, you can pick it up differently. You are not your inner voice. You are the thing that notices it, the listener, not the speaker. And listeners can change the channel. In 2014, a psychologist named Kross found that the grammar of the voice changes what it does to you. When people coach themselves through a hard moment in the first person, I can handle this, and it helps a little. When they switch to the second person, to their own name, you got this. You've done harder than this. They perform better, calm faster, recover cleaner. Talk to yourself the way someone who loved you once talked to you, because that, underneath all of it, is exactly where the voice came from. Here's the last thing. The voice reading this had a birthday. 2 of them. One a few thousand years ago, when our species first learned to call the command its own. One in a room when you were 6, when your out loud narration slipped under the surface and never came back up. For most of the people who ever lived, that voice belonged to the gods. For some people alive right now, it barely speaks at all. For you, it sounds like the truest thing you've got. The The one constant, the one that's always been here. But it hasn't always been here, and one day, in the quiet, it will stop. And the only real question, the one Jaynes spent his life circling, the one anendophasia asks without words, is the one you can sit with right now while the voice takes a breath. When it goes silent, who is still there, listening?